Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today I just wanted to make a short and casual video on the two most recent buffs that we got on the two not very impressive SSR assassins. I'm making this because a lot of people did tell me that they prefer this type of content every now and then, and not just me demoing the buffs when they come out. So hope you guys enjoy. And yeah, let's take a look at how impactful these buffs are, because I think both of these are really good buffs. So first of all, we got Semiramis. Semiramis was considered one of the worst SSRs in the game for multiple reasons, and she got a third skill buff. So her third skill used to be consume 8 stars and puts a 3-turn 1000 damage poison on all enemies, as well as a 50% buster down on all enemies for 3 turns as well, on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is not the best skill, to say the least, and it even takes 8 stars to activate, and this is arguably Semiramis's best skill, so she's not looking very good before the buff. But the buff gave this skill a massive glow up. Now it no longer takes 8 stars to activate. She also gains a 3-turn 50% anti-poison power mod. And to combo with that effect, she also got a on attack effect where whenever she attacks someone, before she actually does the damage with that attack, she would apply a 3-turn 1000 poison on the enemy. This applies to her MP. So what this essentially means is that when she has this skill active, whenever she MPs, the MP will first put poison on all enemies and then do its damage, which would now be affected by the 50% anti-poison power mod. So absolutely insane. A lot of people compared this to Arjuna Alter, because Arjuna Alter's first skill has a 50% power mod against any target that is debuffed, and then obviously his MP would apply the buster down before it does damage, so it would apply the debuff before it does damage, and then the MP would be affected by the power mod. So it is not even that far-fetched of a comparison in my opinion. If you take a look at her MP damage raw, which is, you know, no external buffs, no CEs, it is extremely high, as you can see here. Very ridiculous. It is higher than many single target 4-star assassins at the same MP levels as an AoE, which, you know, going from one of the lowest damaging SSRs in the game to this is really impressive. And obviously all of her buff effects last for 3 turns as long as she is hitting the same target, because they are debuffs, so they don't carry across different waves, but they are all 3-turn debuffs. This of course also amplifies her card damage because it is a power mod, so her buster card is going to be hitting very hard, and her other cards are still gonna be hitting decently hard. Once again, also considering the fact that she's a buster servant, when you pair her with double coin Sky of Light, you can double stack this power mod and get 100% anti-trait on both her MP as well as her face card. So all of this looks very good. But there are still a lot of problems with the character. She wasn't considered one of the worst SSRs in the game for no reason. Issue number 1. She is extremely debuff centric. So what's the problem with being debuff centric? Well, because she's a buster looper especially. Buster looping traditionally focuses very heavy on double stacking your main DPS's steroids in order to generate a big chunk of your damage. Her having a 50% buster down as one of her main steroids is horrible for that, because you obviously can't stack debuffs if you're farming across 3 different waves. In fact, you can't even have it on all 3 waves. You have to choose 2 out of the 3 waves in order for that buster down to activate. So when I showed you the raw MP damage earlier, Cleopatra also having an MP upgrade doesn't even come close to what Semiramis has. However, when we take a look at their buster looping damage, this is assuming MP2 DPS with Dragon's Meridian CE, which only has a 50 MP starting charge effect and nothing else, for the sake of fairness, you can see that the numbers are very close. Cleopatra actually has a very comfortable, you know, slowly growing damage across 3 different waves, while Semiramis, she can either choose to have bigger burst damage on the 3rd wave, but having really lackluster 2nd wave damage, or she can choose to have better damage overall, but give up on the big burst damage on wave 3, because if you get the power mod double stacked as soon as turn 2, that also means that the buster down is wasted on turn 2. So on turn 3, you don't get any buster downs. So first of all, you have to make a little bit of a difficult decision depending on the node, and also the numbers are just not as pretty as they should be. I also have Arjuna Alter's numbers here, where these are actually assuming they're hitting 3 riders, so it's easier to compare with Arjuna Alter, who only has a 1.5 times multiplier against them instead of 2.0. And as you can see, Semiramis technically can beat Arjuna Alter on the first wave and match him on the third, but her second wave is completely demolished by Arjuna Alter's second wave. Of course, I'm not trying to say that single core buster looping is the end-all be-all way to play the game. In fact, it is probably at its least relevant since its inception, just because of how good multi-core farming is right now in JP. But this is just my way of showing how a heavily debuff-based skill set can lead to issues, especially when you're fighting multiple waves of enemies. Just to show that if she's not fighting against multiple waves of enemies, her damage is really impressive. I changed the simulation up a little bit so that she's constantly hitting the same 3 riders that have extremely high HP. And as you can see here, her damage becomes extremely impressive, completely, overshadowing Cleopatra and matching and slightly beating Arjuna Alter even, because Arjuna Alter, remember, also benefits from hitting the same set of targets over and over again because his buster down lasts for 3 turns, and he can obviously stack that on the enemies if he is, fighting a challenge quest with break bars, for example. Her second biggest issue, in my opinion, is her triple arts deck, especially if you want to now maximize the potential of her skill 3 using double Koyanskaya of Light. And of course, the 100% power mod, if you double stack it with Koyan Light, still makes her quick and arts cards hits pretty hard, but it is definitely not even close to having just a second buster card. So her deck is a very, very bad, in my opinion, for challenge quests if you want to go with a more offensive approach. But with all that being said, I still think Semiramis is very solid. She already had a very interesting playstyle of being a tank, but also being a DPS at the same time, but people really didn't want to run her because her damage is so low that they might as well run a better tank unit with no damage on their MP. But now with this, this massive power mod increase, I do think that running her in a slower buster team can be justified because she would definitely, be a faster option than a pure tank servant. Speaking of full tank servants, we have Osakabehime, and her second skill is the one that got buffed this time. It used to be a targetable 20% MP battery that also gives the target a 50% star generation boost for 3 turns on a relatively short 5-turn cooldown. After the buff, both of these effects became party-wide, and it also gained an additional party-wide effect of overcharge boost by 2 stages for 1 time 3 turns, and this of course stayed at a really low 5-turn cooldown. The buff is really solid and I think solves 2 of her biggest issues. Number 1 is her lack of charge, of course. Having a targetable 20% MP battery makes it really awkward because you don't know if you want to use it on herself or on another unit. Now she doesn't have to choose, and of course it also is just a really nice amount of charge overall for your entire party. It helps your DPS, it helps your other support, so spread 20 is good. There's nothing more to it. And of course the overcharge boost at a baseline level would help with her MP's value. Her MP used to feel very lackluster because it is very tanky, but it doesn't offer a lot in terms of offense. It's only 30% buster and quick double buff, which I mean, it's not that bad, but it's also not that insane. Now with this buff, at the very least, when you activate her MP while this skill is in effect, it will bump it up to 40%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a nice increase considering it increases both the quick and buster effectiveness. Right now, I can definitely see you using her with a K-scope to immediately pop her MP, or if you actually have good investment into her, you can max out her Append 2 skill and then use her with an MLB Demonic Bodhisattva CE to bump her MP all the way up to Overcharge 5 for the first activation, which is a 50% quick and buster double buff for 3 turns. And at that point, her damage in terms of supportability is very close to being a meta support, considering her first skill also has a party-wide 50% critical damage up. The overcharge for the other 2 party members, of course, are also very relevant. It obviously depends on who you pair her with. There are servants that have very crappy overcharge effects that really don't care about this, but there are also servants that have ramp-up effects that scale with it, anti-trait that scales with it, or even very unique abilities such as Tonaliko's MP being able to reduce her 3rd skill's cooldown per overcharge stack, right? So certain units would pair very well with this. And of course, it also helps the other secondary support in your party, which supportive MPs usually have decent overcharge effects as well, Castoria being one of the most obvious examples, of course. Now, Osakabehime still suffers from the biggest issue of her inability to spam her MP very effectively. So from my 2 days of testing, I have 2 major ways to use her after the buff, in my opinion. Number 1 is the most standard way to use her in a quick team, which is using her just as a bulkier substitute for Scotty. A lot of the times your quick DPS probably has a decently sized battery, so you don't always need 250 MP batteries in a challenge quest, and Osakabehime is a very good substitute for that, especially if your DPS also really likes overcharge. The 20% party-wide charge, of course, you know, when comboed with a Demonic Bodhisattva CE or other types of MP starting charge CEs, allow Osakabehime to immediately use her MP at high overcharge, and her total amount of buffs does kind of rival Scotty, leans a little bit heavier into Buster, which is not a bad thing at all, considering quick units right now really likes using Buster card to do damage anyways. And you know, Osakabehime obviously makes your party very bulky for the first 3 turns, and if you use her with Caster Scotty, the party-wide battery also helps Caster Scotty get her MP, and the overcharge will bump her damage cut from 500 all the way to 1000, and big damage cut plus defense up is always a golden combo to allow your team to basically take no damage. And after setting up that first turn, your DPS can kind of go ham without having to worry about dying, especially against more high pressure boss fights. I don't recommend picking your support cards over your DPS cards just to get their MP back after the first 3 turns, but because of how bulky you are, maybe you can accidentally get their MP back. And considering how short Osakabehime's skill 2's cooldown is, you can probably at the very least activate it twice. And when you activate it a second time, you probably get your support's MPs back at that point. So it's just a more bulky version of a standard quick team. It's nothing too unique. Quick has always been about buying yourself enough time until you get to kill the enemy, instead of trying to actually outlast your enemy. And I think Osakabehime now with this buff, in certain situations, is justifiable, right? And she also, of course, is going to be a really strong niche pick when you do need buff removal, because she is actually one of the most legit supports that also has full buff removal. If you look at other servants like Kiara or Summer Abigail, when you use them as buff removal units, they only, you know, give you offensive buffs from their skills, and they kind of become dead weight after they have used their skills for the first time. But Osakabehime can continue lingering on and give you value. The second way to use Osakabehime is actually to use her as intended, I suppose, and spam her MP as much as possible and build an impenetrable wall with your team. But it is extremely difficult to do in quick, at least with traditional quick supports, because quick doesn't have an engine character. When I say engine characters, I mean characters like Tamamo, like Merlin, who has a constant source of party-wide MP generation that can help both your DPS and your other supports spam their MP. It's quite ironic that so many people ask me if Osakabehime is now the quick Merlin, but Osakabehime actually kind of needs a quick Merlin if you want to play with this playstyle in quick teams. But in general, I just don't think this playstyle fits Quick anyways, because Quick DPS is the best at utilizing every single card type, so you probably want to pick as many of your DPS's cards as possible, and you never want to instead pick a support's face card to get their MP. But remember, Osakabehime is as much a quick support as a Buster support, because her MP buffs both Quick and Buster equally, and none of her other skill effects are exclusive to a certain card type. So Buster actually does have engine type characters. We have Merlin being the best one, but we also have DPSs that can do something similar, such as Tonaliko and Koyanskaya of Light. So you can actually kind of build a tank team in Buster with Osakabehime while utilizing these combos. I think it's definitely more fun than practical, because if you want to actually build a tank team, Solemn Defense Spam Arts teams are still going to be the king. But I have come up with a couple of interesting comps, such as Koyan Light, Osakabehime, and Tamamo. Tamamo can exploit Osakabehime's skill 2's already short cooldown and make it essentially activate every 2 to 3 turns. And the overcharge boost helps both Tamamo and Koyanskaya of Light charge the entire party's MP. So you get to spam all of your MPs very often with this effect. And of course, both Koyan Light's MP and Tamamo's skill 1 drains the enemy's MP gauge, so the enemy would never get to MP. You can of course also sub out Koyan Light with Tonaliko, who is also a wonderful engine option slash DPS, because Tonaliko really appreciates the overcharge boost to reduce her skill 3's cooldown, and she also has the ability to give 10% slow charge with her first skill, and the skill 3 obviously charges the entire party with 50 MP. So whenever it activates, you are going to triple MP with all your supports and Tonaliko as well, right? So it's kind of like a replacement for Himiko for that particular comp, but a more tanky version of Himiko. And you know, you can also try to sub out Tamamo with Merlin for a more offensive but less safe version of these kinds of teams. And overall, I think it's really fun. I think Osakabehime's buff is solid enough that all of these comps have spawned and they are relatively viable. They're just not the most straightforward teams that you can go for. Overall, I think you know, the buff is really solid. At the very least, it makes her a very good buff removing niche support, and after she removes that buff, she can stick on the board and give your party a lot of value, and also provides an alternative tankier version of a Scotty for your quick team, and also spawns these interesting wall teams. So I like this buff a lot. So hope you guys enjoyed this rambly video, and I'll see you guys in the next one, probably the hot take video on Kira Kira Caster.